Good morning. I always feel a little limbo time when I start my devotion with the computer, but that's okay. Today we look at Acts 19, verses 21 through 41. And the title, the headline in my Bible says, "A Riot at Ephesus." We don't think too much of riots in the Bible, but there were. And I think about, when Jesus was arrested, there was a riot. When Jesus was trying to preach and teach, there were riots. And, people were stirred up against him. And it's the same for many of the disciples as well. And so here they're in Ephesus, and it says that Paul had wanted to pass through Macedonia and Achaia and go to Jerusalem, but they were still in Ephesus. And there was a great commotion that came about in Ephesus because of the silversmiths. The silversmiths made idols, little silver figures out of silver, of course, and people would have them in their homes as objects of worship, objects of devotion. And when Paul was talking and teaching them that these silver idols are false gods, they're nothing to be worshiping, well, sales were starting to slump off, and people were turning away from those false idols that way. And so they got stirred up, against Paul because of that. And they got the people excited. And, at verse 28, they heard about this, they were full of wrath and cried out, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians," and this statue had supposedly fallen out of the sky and landed in Ephesus and was there to protect them and guide them, and this was their god. And Paul had heard about all of this commotion going on, and he wanted to go and see what was happening. But others kind of, no, you just need to stay out of this. You don't need to go over there and stir things up more. They're already stirred up. There's already a riot going on, and you don't need to be there. You're not, you're just not going to smooth things off, because what would happen? Well, of course, he would begin then again teaching about Jesus, and that was exactly what the riot was about, was the teachings of Jesus in contradiction to their worshiping this idol. And it's just kind of interesting, the silversmiths, not only is our trade in danger of falling into disrepute, but the temple of the great goddess may be despised and her magnificence destroyed, and well, we can't have this great goddess, despised. I mean, look at this beautiful figure, this beautiful piece of, silver, stone, whatever it was, and we have to continue to worship it. It would be just a shame, and the reality is that, we know too that statue had no claim to any fame of any sort, and it couldn't do any miracles. To worship it as a god was wrong, because it was just a statue. But, people can get some strange ideas. They really truly can. They can get caught up in this worship of statues or worship of things. And it's easy to manipulate people's minds. And a lot of these people who were against Paul, against people of the way, as they were being called, were saying that, these people are manipulating your minds. There's no way this Jesus could have been raised from the dead. There's no way this Jesus could have done these things. There's no way this Jesus could be the Son of God, the Messiah. It was the disciples who were accused as much as anyone of manipulating people's minds and turning things on end and upsetting the status quo of so much of what was going on in the world. And so they were against Paul in so many ways, and I don't know if I should say they were so much against Paul, but against what Paul was teaching. And so therefore, if someone is teaching something that you don't approve of, you try to silence them. And Paul's friends and co-workers were afraid, probably for his life, that if he went out in there, that it could end badly. Verse 33 says that the crowd drew Alexander out of the multitude, the Jews putting him forward, and they wanted him to make a defense to his people. But when they found out he was a Jew, they all cried out for 2 hours, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." They wouldn't even listen to this Jew, this person who was going to teach about God, about Jesus. They didn't want to hear it anymore. And then verse 35 says, when the city clerk had quieted the crowd, he said, "Men of Ephesus, what man is there that does not know that the city of Ephesus is a temple guardian of the great goddess of Diana, and that the image fell down from heaven? Therefore, since these things cannot be denied, you ought to be quiet and do nothing rashly." This is good advice. Do nothing rashly. Don't get excited. Don't get bent out of shape. Don't make rash judgments. Don't make split-minute or split-second decisions that can change your lives forever. But think, and do nothing rashly. He says, "You have brought these men here who are not robbers of the temples, nor blasphemers, and this fellow craftsmen have a case against anyone, and the courts are open. Let them bring charges in the courts. Let them do it according to a lawful assembly. We are being in danger today of a disorderly gathering." And so this town clerk, mayor, whatever, he had some authority. He had people listen to him, and they realized that he was right. It wasn't a time for rash decisions, rash judgments. It wasn't a time to take matters into their own hands. But they realized too that if they were so strictly opposed to Paul and all of these men and their teachings of Jesus, that they had to handle it through the laws, through the courts of law. That riot mentality, street violence, street justice is not what it should be. But so this town clerk said these things, and then he dismissed the assembly and sent them all home. And I think about that one person who had the common sense, the decency, and the authority. People listened to him. He was someone that they respected. He had a place in the town council. He was, he wasn't just somebody off the street, but the people respected him, and they listened to what he said. And I hope that people in today's world can respect the teachings of the Bible, can listen to the teachings of the Bible. So many of them, I don't know, but there are many who will say that, the Bible is just a book, just a bunch of stuff put together. But to those of us who are saved because of the grace of God's love, the Bible is the Word of God for each and every one of us. Tucked into this part of my Bible, I've got little notes all over my Bible, but just want to share this with you before I close today. The purpose of life is not just to be happy. So, purpose of life can be to be happy, but it's not just to be happy, but it is to be useful, to be responsible, compassionate, to matter, to count, to stand for something, and to have made a difference because you have lived at all. So it kind of goes back to that golden rule: love God with heart, soul, strength, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. But to make a difference in someone else's life. And that's what God would have us do, to make a positive difference in someone else's life. And we had that model for us today in that town clerk, whoever he was, that had the sense and the decency to say, let's not get caught up in crowd mentality. But let's do this according to the right process.